For this lesson on data retention settings in Security Gateway, here's a quick summary of what you'll learn. How to configure how long to keep message database records, message content, and message SMTP session transcripts, under what circumstances message content will be retained or deleted, the purpose of message database records, for example for populating the graphical reports, and configuring database logging exclusions. So let's talk about Security Gateway's data retention settings, which you'll find here under the database section under the Setup Users menu in the main Security Gateway menu. So let's click on Data Retention here. With the settings on this screen, you can determine how long to keep message database records, message content, or message SMTP transcripts. You can also determine under what circumstances message content will be retained or deleted, and how long to keep message transcripts. So we'll talk about these options here on the screen. And by the way, before we get started, the purpose of these database records is to allow you to view the information contained within this database in the message logs and in the graphs and charts under the reporting tools. So, for example, if I go here to Reports, and then I click on any of these reports here, such as outbound mail, top senders, or messages processed, things like that. All of these charts and graphs are populated by the data contained within the database. So your data retention settings will affect how much data will be available to populate these charts and graphs. So let's go back to the data retention settings, again under Setup Users, Database, Data Retention. So starting from the top here, you can determine how long you want to retain message database records. And again, keep in mind, as it says here, reports will be limited to this time frame, and a longer time frame will result in a larger database. So, for example, if you want to retain 30 days worth of database activity, and therefore 30 days worth of charts and graphs and logs and things like that, then you can select the second option to delete records after, and then put 30 in the blank. That is the default value. So database records by default are deleted after 30 days. Or you can select take no action, and then those messages and those contents will remain in the database indefinitely. You can also configure what to do with message transcripts. So for example, you can process the transcript with the message database record, or you can choose different settings for message transcripts. For example, delete them after a given period of days, for example 14 days, or do not store message transcripts. So when you view messages in the message log, one of the options available for you is to view the actual message transcript. You'll be able to view the session transcript for the message headers, and the message content itself. So that's what this is referring to, is the transcript of the message delivery processes that took place during the delivery process. You can also check this box to delete bandwidth information after a given period of time, say for example 30 days. And if we scroll down to the remaining options on this screen, by checking these boxes you can decide to not delete message content after a successful delivery, or if a message was deleted from the quarantine, when a message was rejected, if there was a permanent delivery failure, or if delivery of the message was incomplete. So typically for many of these, or most of these, you don't necessarily need this information in your database. For example, you don't necessarily need to look up an incomplete message, or if a message was successfully delivered, you may or may not necessarily need to be able to read that message content. You just want to make sure that it was successfully delivered. But if you want to retain that information as an administrator, you do have the option to do so by checking these boxes here. And again, keep in mind that this means the database will be a bit larger because it will contain this data that is normally deleted. So for example, let me save my changes before I continue, and then I'll show you an example of what these items are referring to, the message transcripts, message content, and so forth. And then I'll come back to this screen and I'll explain the remaining options listed down here. For example, if I look at the log of messages transmitted through Security Gateway, again, if I go to the message log, for example, right here, all of these messages are in the database currently. And I can click on a message, I can review it, and I'll see these tabs here across the top. I've got a message transcript showing the delivery commands from server-to-server communications. I've got a tab here for the message content and a tab here for the message source. So those data retention settings that we were talking about on that previous screen apply to this information here. For example, the checkbox that said do not delete message transcripts after a successful delivery, that would apply to the transcript information here. There's also the option do not delete message content after a successful delivery, and so that would apply to any content under the message tab here. If these contents were deleted based on your data retention settings, then instead of seeing the actual content of the message here, you would see a message saying this content has already been deleted due to your data retention settings, or something similar to that effect. And I believe I have an example I can show you of what that looks like. Here's an example of what it looks like if you have your data retention settings configured to delete the contents of a message after a successful delivery, for example. You'll get this message here saying that the content is not available. And that will also apply to the message headers of the message source in this case. So let's go back and talk about the remaining settings on the data retention screen. So again, back to setup users, back to data retention under the database section here. So again, those examples I was just showing you apply to these settings right here under the message content, whether or not you want to retain or delete message content. And these settings up here, whether or not you want to delete message transcripts or delete database records after a given period of time. You can configure logging exclusions, database logging exclusions, to reduce the size of the database. So for example, if you don't want to log messages that were filtered out due to dynamic screening, or messages that might have been from sessions that were not completed, or messages that contain an invalid recipient or an invalid sender, or messages that failed the mail lookup commands, for example, you can exclude these events from the database. Keep in mind though, if you enable some of these or any of these, then they will not show up in your logs. So for example, if you check the box for dynamic screening and a message was refused by the dynamic screening feature, if this box is checked, then it will not be written to the database, and you will not see it when you go to the message log to review your in and outbound message traffic. It will still be written to the actual plain text log files. It just will not be written to the database where you can review it using the graphs and reports and the actual message log listing screen in Security Gateway. So I typically have these boxes unchecked.